Why are children still hungry? It's 2023, right? So why are over 3 million children still dying of starvation? And whose job is it to feed them? Is it the mother's job? Is it the father's? Is it the families? Is it society's? Is it every citizen's? And is this question actually still even valid in 2023? But I'd like to please sit with this question for a while. Whose job is it to feed a dying child? Like many of you in this room, I'm an African. I was born in this country. And long before I'd started school, I had already been schooled into the ways of an African life. Our shared values, our common humanity, our co-responsibility for each other, our oneness. And many years later, as a corporate lawyer, the one question that was of great concern to me after I got to understand that companies too are also citizens, corporate citizens, was how can we use policy and the law to make sure that companies, particularly big business, start to play a significant role in contributing towards social development and sustainability? That would be my question, which would concern me for much of my life as a lawyer. And when I left law, it still lingered on. Can you absolutely imagine a world in which big business specifically fully and truly embraces oneness as its anchor? Well, we don't have to think very far, luckily for us. One of my absolute favorite stories was told by Chief Justice Zondo of South Africa. He was being interviewed for his position in the Constitutional Court. And he recounted a story of how when he had to go to university, his mom didn't have money. And so he went to a shop owner in town and said, "I need help." The shop owner, Mr. Musa, said to him, "I'll give you food vouchers that you can give to your mother so you can go to university." Food vouchers. Food. Not a bursary, not transport money, not books, but food. And so that was how the young man known as Raymond Zondo finally became the Chief Justice of South Africa. It was because he didn't have to make the difficult choice that so many of our young people have to make between providing for their families and pursuing higher education, which will ultimately lead them to make a positive contribution to this country. And that's why food should be the source of all of us concern. And the question, how do you feel and who feeds a hungry child, a dying child, does not arise. Well, as I said, I was a lawyer, a practicing lawyer. I left law and I still had this question about how to use policy and how to use the law. And I found myself working for the African Peer Review Mechanism, which is an organ of the African Union. And my job was actually to go out to African countries and promote good corporate governance practices, because we had seen that some of the fastest growing economies in the world were in Africa. However, corporate governance was not a very well established concept on the continent. So in doing this job, and this was just before COVID-19, we went to countries in different geographical locations across the continent, and each time we spoke to business owners, policymakers, regulators, SMEs, representatives of the informal sector, we came up with data that led us to the conclusion that there has to be a major paradigm shift into how business, small or big, actually conducts its business. And that there was and there is a missing element in the manner in which business conducts its business. So we then thought for a moment, But then how do we solve for this problem? How do we ensure that business, particularly big business, comes to the table? And as I said, a major paradigm shift was required in terms of how we approach corporate governance, the rules of doing business, and so started our work, which I was a part of, to put together and develop what we would then call the African Principles of Corporate Governance. And right then, the onset of COVID-19 happened. With the onset of COVID-19, we did see that what was initially a health pandemic quickly escalated into very much a humanitarian crisis. And big business came to the party. In different countries across Africa, we saw big businesses, particularly banks, issuing soft loans to SMEs so that those companies could keep the workforce at work, so that people could feed their families. We also saw in South Africa the establishment of what was known as the Solidarity Response Fund. And this fund consisted of business, government, and civil society movements that came together to work on the single biggest threat of the moment, which was the pandemic. And along with the community partners that were part of the fund, big business allocated billions of rands towards the community partners, towards what the community partners identified as the biggest threat of the moment, which of course we had all anticipated would be health, but what actually it turned out to be food insecurity. And what this tells us, and what it told us at the time, as we were busy developing these African principles, is that not only were we on the right track to say that we need this paradigm shift to make sure that business continues to play a significant role in social transformation. What COVID-19 and the Solidarity Response Fund in South Africa and many other similar funds across the world, it reminded us of our shared humanity. It also illustrated to all of us what we already knew as Africans, and that is our African ancient wisdom of umuntu, umuntu ngabantu. I am because you are. You are because I am. And so there lay the roadmap for us, for the new set, the new ways of doing business. And we took what was clearly a very good illustration of collaboration and cooperation of all citizens in the country, the very essence of Ubuntu. And we've come up with what is called the African Principles and Guidelines on Corporate Governance, which I will not speak very broadly about, but I would like to bring to your attention 3 key principles that we believe need to be infused into the rules of doing business. The first one being that every business must be guided by a shared value that it shares with people around it. Its strategy, operations, vision, and mission must add value to society. Secondly, every business must cultivate a sense of place and belonging, meaning foreign businesses and businesses homegrown must ensure that they share a common social identity with those around it. Thirdly, human rights and trust. For the very first time, we have ensured that corporate governance infuses within itself the responsibility of business to not only report on human rights practices within the business, but to ensure that it doesn't become an aside reporting tool while it continues to conduct its business. And being a lawyer myself, I have really recognized the power of the policy and the law to re-engineer social transformation. And what the Solidarity Fund also expressed to us is that we need to go beyond, though, what we see as the effectiveness of our policy, that what we actually need is the right kind of leadership in order to effect that paradigm shift, the right kind of leadership within big business, we need the sort of leadership within business that understands his or her role as a social transformer, that understands that along with his or her responsibility towards the profit of the business must in fact be accompanied by his or her responsibility towards society. Because there is neither policy nor law in this world that can force a company to change, but its leaders must. And so therefore, we have come, and I specifically have come to say, you know, as a country, as a continent, and as the world, we've seen business do really great and fantastic things in terms of ensuring that it addresses our social ills, in terms of showing that it is part of social transformation. We have the SDGs 2030. We have corporate social responsibility programs all around us. We have ESG practices, which are now widely accepted. But I say to you, there is still one thing we haven't done, and we still sit here in 2023 today and ask the question, whose responsibility is it to feed a dying child? And that tells us that there is something we haven't tried, which we need to try. And in my view, that thing that is still outstanding is known as Ubuntu. So we have to find a way as a people to make sure that we combine the best of how we do business and the values of our shared humanity and core responsibility for one another and bring them together. And at that intersection of doing great business and Ubuntu, at that intersection is where you will find the magic of addressing and dealing with food insecurity. I thank you.